Jason and Joanna got divorced 99 times. Each time, she'd use the cooling-off period to quietly wait for his desperate attempts to win her back. Once he finally managed to appease her, she'd let him cancel their application. On the 99th application for divorce, as Jason got up, the clerk behind him curiously asked, "So when are you coming back to cancel it this time?" He looked at her cold back in front of him and told himself this time he wouldn't. After the 1-month cooling-off period passed, he and she were officially divorced. The wind outside the civil affairs office was chilly. As Jason stepped out, he watched Joanna climb into that red Cayenne without looking back, graceful and composed, not sparing him a glance. Jason walked slowly down the sidewalk. It felt like his heart had been torn open, the cold wind blowing right through. Suddenly, a screech of brakes pierced the air behind him. Before he could react, a force knocked him to the ground. His knee burned as his hands scraped the pavement. Looking up, Jason saw Joanna's friends jump out of the car. "Oh no, we hit brother-in-law." "Don't call him that." Someone nudged her. "They're divorced already." Joanna hasn't agreed to cancel the application. Jason tried to push himself off the ground, but his knee gave out. Glancing past those heavily made-up women, he saw the Cayenne's rear window roll halfway down. Joanna's refined profile was just visible in the shadows. Someone asked Joanna if they should take him to the hospital first or head straight to the party. Time seemed to freeze. Jason stared at that car window, his heart pounding painfully. "Let's go to the party." Joanna's voice came through the window, cold as ice. Those 3 words, so light, stabbed into his heart like knives. The Cayenne sped off, exhaust blowing in his face. He gritted his teeth and slowly climbed to his feet, limping home. Each step sent pain shooting through his knee, but it was nothing compared to the bleeding hole in his heart. The first thing Jason did when he got home was pack his bags. He dug out all the proofs of his love over the years. The tie clip she carelessly tossed to him, the empty perfume bottles he secretly collected, the unicorn nightlight he made for her with his own hands. Piece by piece, he threw them all into the trash, until he came across a brown paper bag hidden deep in a drawer. It wasn't the first time he'd seen it, but his fingers still trembled as he opened it again. Love letters. Joanna's letters to him. "Today you brought me breakfast again, but you didn't know I'd been up since 5, just to watch you quietly leave the lunchbox by the window. The handwriting in your love letters is terrible, but I've saved them to laugh at on our 50th anniversary. You looked really good in that white shirt today, but I don't want others to see it. This is your 3rd year chasing me, and I almost gave in. But I thought I should wait a little more to enjoy being pursued by you." Every word jabbed painfully at his heart. If it weren't for stumbling on these love letters a few days ago, he wouldn't believe that the Joanna who's been so cold to him all these years actually liked him too. The first time he saw Joanna was at the college opening ceremony. As a student representative, she spoke with an aura as cool and noble as the moon. Just with that one look, he was hooked. Many people pursued Joanna, but Jason was the most persistent. He brought her breakfast even though she never ate it, memorized her schedule to coincidentally bump into her. He even broke his wrist climbing the school fence to buy medicine when she got hurt dancing. For 4 years, 1,460 days, he followed her like a faithful puppy until he finally claimed his moon. Even after getting together, she remained distant, never responding even a little. They only got married because he pushed for it, but he was content. Yet after 3 years of marriage, she asked for a divorce 99 times. The first time was because the meal he cooked was too salty, and she said he couldn't even handle small tasks like that. The second was for wearing dress pants she didn't like. The 98th time, she insisted he only send 10 messages a day, and he accidentally sent an extra goodnight message. Each time, he'd humbly beg her not to leave. The 99th time, he knelt in the study all night before she reluctantly agreed to cancel the application. And that night, he accidentally discovered a brown paper bag locked in the safe. It was full of love letters from Joanna, from the first year he pursued her. Turns out she liked him all along. Turns out each divorce request was to see him grovel, begging her to stay. She enjoyed his love, treating his sincerity as entertainment. The next day, Joanna filed for the 100th divorce. The reason was her car now smelled like his cologne, which she disliked. Seeing the woman he'd loved for 7 years at that moment felt like gazing at a stranger. This time, he didn't want to play her game anymore. So this time, he wouldn't beg her again as she wished. It was completely over between them, suppressing the bitterness rising from his heart. He continued packing his bags. But halfway through, he realized his mother's keepsake was missing. It was an old silver ring, the only thing left from his mom to him. Jason searched the whole closet, even under the bed, but the ring seemed to have vanished into thin air. Sitting on the floor, his fingers unconsciously clenching the fabric. Only he and Joanna had been in that study. Recalling the party location he overheard at the civil affairs office, he bit his lip, grabbed his coat, and left. At the club entrance, the thick door muffled the laughter inside, though it was still clear. I bet 5 days. Jason won't last more than 5 days before begging Joanna to reconcile. 5 days is too long. Everyone knows Jason can't survive without Joanna. I bet 3 days. I bet 1 day. Didn't he beg Joanna not to divorce him the same night last time? Joanna, how many days do you bet? For a moment, the room was silent. Joanna sat in the center, her pale fingers holding a whiskey glass, her eyes filled with complex emotions. Just as she was about to speak, Jason burst through the door, saying clearly, I bet my entire life. Before he could finish, a bright voice interrupted. Sorry I'm late. Harry, dressed in a white suit, walked in, immediately drawing all eyes. He smiled as he reached for Joanna's hand, pulling her into a close embrace. Jason watched their intimate stance and closed his eyes in trembling silence. Harry had always been like a shadow in their relationship, from when Joanna and he started dating to when they got married. She never pushed Harry away, even tacitly allowing him to cross boundaries repeatedly. Jason had once doubted Joanna's feelings for Harry. Yet, it wasn't until he stumbled upon the love letters that he realized Harry was just a tool she used to make him jealous. She enjoyed seeing him consumed by jealousy for love. Joanna finally noticed Jason standing at the door and frowned slightly. What are you doing here? Jason clenched his fists, realizing she hadn't heard a word he said earlier. The ring I left at home is missing, he said, looking directly at her. Did you see it? Joanna paused, then her expression darkened. For that? What else? Jason retorted, what did you think I was here for? Her face clouded instantly. Jason knew that look all too well. Every time he didn't follow her script, she'd wear that look of displeasure. You mean the silver ring? Harry suddenly chimed in. I mentioned I liked it once and Joanna gave it to me. He tilted his head, looking innocent, but I accidentally lost it when I got home. Jason's mind went blank, blood rushing to his head. What gives you the right to give away my things? It's just a silver ring. Joanna coldly interrupted him. Why get so worked up? I'll get you 10 more another day. It was my mother's heirloom. Jason nearly shouted, his voice trembling. The room fell silent. Joanna, initially surprised, quickly reverted to indifference. It's lost now. What do you want me to do about it? Don't make a big deal out of it. Jason bit his lip hard until he tasted blood. Even after he said it was his mom's heirloom, she still thought he was overreacting. Joanna, is this how you show your love for me? Knowing he'd never get the ring back, Jason turned to leave, afraid he'd break down if he stayed a second longer. From behind came the sound of a chair scraping the floor as Joanna stood up. That's enough. Let's go. She followed. As they exited the club, the night wind stung Jason's cheeks. He walked briskly, head down, not wanting them to see his wounded pride. Suddenly, an eerie creak sounded above. Jason barely had time to react when someone screamed behind him. Look out! He looked up to see a massive billboard crashing down on them. In a split second, Joanna instinctively rushed towards Jason but, after meeting his eyes, veered last second to pull Harry out of harm's way. Thud! As pain surged through him, the only emotion Jason felt was despair. Just to avoid exposing her feelings for him, she was willing to risk his life? When he woke up, a stark white ceiling greeted him. Jason painfully turned his head. The hospital room was empty. You're awake? A nurse entered to change his bandages. You've been out for 2 days. You're lucky it was just a mild concussion. Who brought me here? Jason's throat felt parched. Your wife, the nurse said while adjusting the foredrip. You were covered in blood. She was frantic, almost flipped the whole hospital. But once she heard you'd wake soon, she hurriedly left, said she had urgent matters. Strange. Huh? Jason closed his eyes, a bitter smile forming. Not strange at all. She would never reveal any bit of her true feelings for him. For the next few days, Joanna didn't make an appearance. It wasn't until the day he was discharged that Jason saw her again. She arrived at his hospital room with Harry, who held her hand closely, looking vibrant. Hey Jason, you healed so fast, Harry teased. Unlike me, I've been frail since childhood. I just get a little cold, and Joanna gets so worried she'd bring me to the hospital for a checkup. Jason packed his belongings calmly, not even lifting his head. Joanna stared at him intently, as if trying to decipher his emotions. We'll take you home with us. Harry's house is under renovation, so he'll be staying with us for a few days, she suddenly said. Okay. Jason zipped up his suitcase without care. Once the mandated cooling-off period for their divorce was over, they'd have nothing to do with each other. She could let anyone move in. It didn't matter to him. Seeing his indifference, Joanna's expression darkened. Back at the villa, Joanna seemed to deliberately provoke Jason with Harry, acting overly affectionate in front of him. No matter her efforts, Jason remained unresponsive. At dinner, Joanna personally peeled shrimp for Harry, feeding him. Jason mechanically chewed his food, tasteless like chewing wax. Suddenly, Harry cried out and scratched his arm. It's itchy. Jason looked up to see large welts quickly forming on Harry's neck, his breathing becoming labored. Joanna swiftly picked him up. Call a doctor. The private doctor arrived promptly, diagnosing a peanut allergy. Joanna called the servants over, her voice icy. How many times have I said Harry is allergic to peanuts? Why was there peanut sauce in tonight's dinner? One servant lowered her head, nervously twisting her apron. She hesitantly glanced at Jason. It was Mr. Jason who insisted. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm just an employee. Jason stood, shocked, the chair scraping the floor deafeningly. When did I ever? Sir, stop making excuses. The servant suddenly raised her voice, interrupting him. You personally said you couldn't stand Harry moving in and were jealous of how well Madam treated him. So you wanted us to give him a hard time, Jason. Joanna's voice was icy, and it seemed to drop the temperature in the entire dining room. She approached step by step. The sound of her high heels hitting the marble floor echoed clearly. Since the day at the Civil Affairs Bureau, you've been quiet. I thought you'd finally learned your lesson, she said, looking down at him, her gaze sharp as if trying to pierce through his thoughts. But I didn't expect you'd put your mind to this. Jason was about to retort but was suddenly taken aback. He distinctly saw Joanna's lips curl slightly. Though it was fleeting, that smile was very real. If you dared to make Harry have an allergic reaction, Joanna turned to fetch a bottle of hard liquor from the wine rack, the glass bottle hitting the table with a crisp sound. Then you should also taste what it feels like to have an allergy. Jason's back was pressed against the cold wall, and his heart, along with every limb, was cold. She knew. She had always known he was allergic to alcohol. 2 bodyguards held his shoulders on either side, their coarse fingers digging painfully into him. As the strong liquor burned down his throat, the fiery sensation spread from his mouth to his stomach. He coughed violently, the alcohol uncontrollably gushing out, but he was still forced to down more than half the bottle. Soon, a familiar stinging sensation surfaced from deep under his skin. His neck and arms broke out in large red rashes. His breathing labored, and his vision started to blur. Before he completely sank into darkness, the last thing Jason saw was Joanna standing backlit with a teasing curve at her lips. She was smiling. She was actually smiling. When he woke up, only a dim bedside lamp was on in the bedroom. Joanna was sitting by the bed, her pale fingers flipping through some documents. She only looked up when she heard movement. Awake? She closed the documents, her tone as calm as discussing the weather. Don't do that again. Jason struggled to sit up, his throat burning. He looked at Joanna's distinctly softened expression and suddenly realized something, filling him with a deep sense of despair. She didn't care whether Harry was allergic or not. What she cared about was his recent coldness toward her and enjoyed seeing him get jealous over her. Just like those love letters locked in the safe stated, she liked watching him go crazy for her, lose his mind for her. But unfortunately, this time he wouldn't play this game with her anymore. 15 days. In 15 days, they'd be officially divorced and have nothing to do with each other. 2 days later, Harry's design won the gold medal. Joanna threw a grand celebration party for Harry. Under the crystal chandeliers, she stayed by Harry's side the entire time, blocking drinks for him, adjusting his tie, being so attentive it was ridiculous. The guests whispered about how Joanna was so good to her childhood friend but so cold to her husband. If not for Jason's constant humble efforts to win her back, this marriage would have ended long ago. Jason stood in a corner, swirling his champagne glass, ignoring the chatter. Halfway through the party, he walked to the artificial lake alone to get some air. The night breeze was cool, dissipating some of the alcohol fumes. "What's the matter? Finally can't take it anymore." Harry's voice came from behind, filled with a victor's smugness. Wearing his limited edition shoes, he walked up next to Jason, a mocking smile on his lips. "If I were you, I'd have been smart enough to leave." Jason couldn't be bothered to even look at him. "Move. Acting all high and mighty?" Harry mocked. "You've chased Joanna for 4 years, been married for 3, and still couldn't make her notice you. Pathetic. Do you really think if I pushed you in right now, she'd care?" Just as he finished speaking, Jason felt a strong shove. Splash. The cold lake water immediately enveloped Jason's face, and he struggled to call for help, only to swallow more water. Amidst blurred vision, he saw a figure frantically rushing over and jumping into the lake without hesitation. "Jason!" Joanna's voice was filled with unprecedented panic as she desperately swam towards him, her slender arms grabbing his hand. Jason saw her eyes, the fear and urgency so real they made him dizzy for a moment. Standing on the shore, Harry was completely stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes. The Joanna who was always so indifferent to Jason was now jumping into the lake like a madwoman. The way she pulled Jason with all her might was as if protecting a precious treasure she'd almost lost. No, this can't be. He must be seeing things. Very soon, Joanna's bodyguards arrived and pulled both of them ashore. Once on land, Joanna didn't care about appearances, kneeling to give Jason mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Her long fingers trembled uncontrollably until he coughed up a few mouthfuls of water, and only then did she breathe a sigh of relief. But her expression suddenly froze, as if realizing something. She stood up, quickly reining in all her emotions, returning to that cold, aloof demeanor. So useless, falling in at a party? Jason sat there, drenched, gripping his wet shirt, his voice unusually clear. "I didn't fall. Harry pushed me." Harry immediately panicked, shaking his head vigorously. "Jason, I didn't. How can you accuse me?" "Fine," Jason scoffed, trembling as he pulled out his phone. "If you won't admit it, let the police investigate. Attempted murder should be enough to lock you up." Just as his finger touched the dial button, Joanna grabbed his wrist. "Enough." Her voice was cold, with a tone that brooked no argument. "Harry didn't mean it. Don't make a big deal out of it." Jason snapped his head up, incredulous. "He nearly got me killed. But you're still standing here, aren't you?" Joanna intensified her tone, narrowing her eyes in warning. "Don't make a scene." Jason suddenly found it all incredibly absurd. He knew Joanna needed Harry as a tool to provoke him. But for this ridiculous game, she's willing to disregard his life? "I'm not causing a scene," he stated, pressing the buttons for 911. "I have to report this. I said enough." Joanna raised her voice and grabbed his phone. "You need to calm down. Go and think about what you've done." She signaled for the security guards. "Take him to the holding room. Let him out when he's ready to think straight." As Jason was dragged away by the guards, he struggled violently. "Joanna, are you crazy?" he shouted hoarsely. "He's trying to kill me. You know it." He scratched at the guard's arms, leaving marks, and his cufflink fell to the ground during the struggle. But with their strength and numbers, his attempts were futile. When the door of the holding room slammed shut, Jason's pupils shrunk. The small, windowless room was engulfed in darkness, swallowing him whole. "Let me out," he screamed. His voice started to tremble. Claustrophobia gripped him like an invisible hand around his throat. He remembered when he was 10 and his stepmother locked him in the basement for 3 days. The feeling of being abandoned by the world swept over him again. Jason curled up in the corner, his nails digging into his palms. Rats scurried in the darkness, and he bit his lip to stay silent. Time blurred, maybe an hour, maybe a whole day. He refused any food offered, knocking the water cup over. His throat was painfully dry, but the mental anguish hurt more than any physical pain. The next day, when the door finally opened, the bright light forced Jason to squint. "Still want to press charges?" Joanna's voice came from above. Weakly, he looked up and saw her silhouette against the light. Not a day had passed, yet she still looked perfectly put together, while he looked like a mess. Jason suddenly laughed, a laugh that he felt deep in his chest. "No more charges," he whispered like a feather in the wind. "I won't pursue anything." He just wanted freedom. Away from Harry, away from Joanna, away from this hellhole. Joanna frowned at his unexpected response, feeling uneasy, but she quickly regained her indifferent expression. "Remember what you said." She walked away, missing the resolute glint in Jason's eyes. Jason stumbled back to his room, collapsing onto his bed, burying his face in the blanket. He thought he couldn't feel anything, but every drop of blood seemed to turn cold. Curled like a shrimp, even breathing was painful. He laid there in a daze for a day, until the next day he finally forced himself up, ate a bit, and drank some water. His phone buzzed with a message from his college group chat. "Get together tonight at 7 at the Crown Hotel. Be there if you can." He stared at the screen in a daze. He was leaving soon. He wouldn't see these people again. Might as well say goodbye. At the hotel, Jason applied ice to his swollen eyes and picked out a plain white shirt. "Jason." His college roommate Victor waved him over. "Over here." A group of old classmates gathered at a table, bombarding him with questions about his life. Victor raised an eyebrow. "You chased Joanna like crazy back then. Did you ever get together?" Curious eyes were all on him. Jason's fingers paused slightly. He had pursued Joanna loudly back then, the whole school knew. But she only agreed after they graduated, so few knew they were together. Especially since Joanna thought a wedding was too much hassle, and they never even had a ceremony. "Didn't work out," he said softly, a faint smile at his lips. If he could redo it, he'd wish never to have met Joanna. "No way. Even she rejected a guy like you?" his classmates exclaimed. "Joanna's standards must be sky high." "Don't worry. I've got some great girls to introduce to you," Victor offered, pulling out his phone. "Introduce what?" A deep voice cut through from behind. Jason flinched and turned to see Joanna with Harry not too far away. She was wearing a form-fitting emerald green gown, and the diamonds at her neckline sparkled under the lights. "Joanna?" His classmates were stunned. Joanna was holding Harry's arm, and he looked dapper in his dark patterned suit. The moment they appeared, they became the center of attention. "Is this your girlfriend?" someone asked cautiously. Harry smiled, and Joanna didn't deny it. The room burst into delighted applause. "What a perfect match." Jason sipped his water, pretending not to hear. Joanna's gaze stayed on him, sharp as a blade. The room's energy picked up again, as classmates grouped to catch up. Someone suggested a game of truth or dare. When the bottle stopped, it pointed right at Harry. "I choose dare," Harry declared, glancing at Joanna. "Kiss someone of the opposite gender for 10 seconds. As soon as the dare was announced, the room buzzed with cheers. Harry feigned shyness, touching the diamond cufflink on his shirt, but went straight to Joanna. Joanna lounged lazily on the sofa, her gaze cutting through the crowd, landing on Jason in the corner. He was fiddling with his phone, ignoring the scene. Her eyes chilled as Harry stood before her, visibly eager. Under everyone's watchful eyes, Joanna suddenly pulled him onto the sofa beside her. Without hesitation, she straddled his lap with precision. Her slim fingers brushed his cheek, leaving a kiss on his lips. It was mesmerizing. The room erupted with whoops and cheers, nearly lifting the roof. The kiss lasted longer than 10 seconds, Joanna purposefully making suggestive sounds. Jason finally looked up but just glanced around and went right back to scrolling on his phone. Joanna's face darkened even more. For the rest of the time, she flaunted her affection with Harry. She fed him, hugged his waist, and whispered in his ear. But every few minutes, she'd sneak a glance at Jason. He remained indifferent. After the party ended, Jason went to the restroom. As he stepped out, Harry cornered him in the hallway. "Did you see this?" Harry waved his phone, flaunting a picture of him and Joanna making out. "Joanna's into me, buddy. Do yourself a favor and get that divorce. And this time, don't come crawling back." Jason didn't even bother to look at him and just turned away. Harry got frustrated watching Jason remain unfazed, like his plan just hit a pillow instead of a punch. Just as Harry geared up to swing at Jason, he heard familiar clicks of high heels approaching. His expression shifted, and he switched actions last second. Smash! The sound of the restroom mirror shattering echoed around them. Harry checked his bleeding hand, his lips curling into a victorious smirk. Moments later, the restroom door flew open. "Joanna!" Harry cried out dramatically, staggering forward. "Jason, he hit me because I was playing a game with you." Joanna glanced at Harry's injured hand, but her gaze fixed on Jason. Her confusion about why Jason was unfazed by her and Harry's display now made sense. So he had been silently jealous. The realization flooded her with a secret joy, but outwardly her expression darkened. "It was just a game. Does that really bother you so much?" Joanna said coldly. "Besides, we're divorced. Who I'm with or what I do is none of your business." She bore into Jason's pale face and said slowly, "Hurting Harry doesn't help. Jason, if you want to get back together, show some sincerity." He calmly replied, "I didn't hit him. He did it to himself. Enough." Joanna cut him off. "You love your games so much? Fine, spend the night here thinking it over." The door slammed shut, followed by the unmistakable click of a lock. Jason slammed his palms on the locked door, his hands turning red and numb. After what felt like forever, the lock finally clicked open. He sighed in relief but barely turned around before 3 thugs cornered him in the end of the hallway. The big guy leading them yanked Jason's hair and growled, "You Jason?" "I'm not," Jason quickly denied, sensing the danger. But a punch to his stomach forced him to double over, only to be pulled upright by his hair again. Smack! A vicious punch rang in his ears, and blood oozed from his mouth. "Pretty boy, why are you so shameless?" The thug gripped Jason's jaw, slapping his face playfully. "Let's teach you a lesson today." Fists and boots rained down on him. Jason curled up on the ground, instinctively protecting his head. A sharp crack from his ribs blurred his vision, but he bit his lip to hold back any noise. "Enough, don't kill him," one of the goons finally stepped in. Harry said to just rough him up a bit. Footsteps faded away. Jason lay motionless on the cold floor, every part of him screaming in pain. He tried flexing his fingers, but even that small movement made him sweat bullets. Harry's smug laughter echoed from down the hallway. "Let's see if he dares to act tough again." Jason managed to roll onto his back, staring at the blinding ceiling lights. A drop of blood trickled down his temple, and he suddenly chuckled. "Joanna, is this what you want? You love me but enjoy watching me suffer. Seeing me humiliated? Fine, you win. But that's the last time." When Jason finally dragged his battered body home, Harry's affected voice floated down from the 2nd floor. "Joanna, it's storming. Can you stay with me tonight?" Jason braced himself on the banister, every step a painful ordeal. Joanna began to refuse, but spotting Jason at the staircase, she changed her mind. "All right." Harry's arm wrapped around Joanna's waist as they disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Jason without so much as a glance. Jason forced a bitter smile, retreating to his guest room, exhaustion pulling him down. For the next few days, he stayed cooped up, focusing on his design competition submission. It was a career he intended to rebuild after the divorce. Previously, he was the most talented student in the design department, with his instructor predicting his future brilliance. Until that day, Joanna caught a female colleague dropping him home. "Quit or divorce," she said icily. Without hesitation, Jason chose to quit. Now he could finally pick up the brush again. As he engrossed himself in perfecting his design sketches, the door suddenly swung open. Joanna marched in with Harry, her eyes setting on his drafts, her face instantly darkening. "I told you I don't like you doing this," she snapped, yanking the pen from his hand. "If you want me to reconsider the divorce, stay away from this." Jason looked up, finding it ridiculous. Did she really think she could still control him? He said nothing, though, just quietly putting away his work. Joanna, assuming he'd surrendered, left satisfied, Harry in tow. As they left, Harry gave the sketches a lingering look, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. 3 days after submitting his design, Jason received a call from the organizers. "Jason, your work is suspected of plagiarism. Unless proven otherwise, you'll be disqualified." "What?" Jason was in disbelief. "Who did I copy?" "It matches the work submitted by the up-and-coming designer, Harry. He's at the top right now, he'd never copy you. So we have to raise this issue with you." Jason suddenly remembered the look in Harry's eyes when he saw the design draft that day. He quickly said, "I have the original draft to prove it." He hung up the phone and searched the entire room but couldn't find the original draft anywhere. "Looking for this?" Harry's voice came from behind. Jason whipped around and saw him holding the original design draft. "How did you get that?" "Because I said I liked it," Harry said, shaking the paper smugly, "and Joanna just gave it to me without hesitation." He leaned close to Jason, provocatively saying, "See? Joanna likes me. Just accept it and stop thinking about getting back together. Leaving is better for everyone." Jason's mind went blank. He rushed to confront Joanna but was met with a cold response. "I told you I don't like you messing with these things. If you had listened and given up, none of this would have happened." He looked at the woman he'd loved for 7 years, feeling as though his heart was being torn apart. Why is she always like this? Ignoring his likes, not caring about his feelings. If it weren't for those love letters, he wouldn't believe this woman ever liked him. Jason knew that losing the original meant there was no point in saying anything more. He was condemned for plagiarism. He returned to his room, shut himself in the darkness. His phone suddenly pulled him back to reality. "Jason, are you coming back?" His mentor's excited voice came through. "I saw your work at the competition." Jason choked up. "Teacher, I didn't plagiarize." "I know." The mentor said firmly, "Your talent is unmatched. No way you'd plagiarize." He sighed. "It's just a pity. Back then, you gave up because of Joanna. I was foolish before." Jason wiped away his tears. "I'm already applying for a divorce, planning to start over." "That's wonderful," his mentor said excitedly. "Want to join my studio in Paris? Your fellow alumni are all there. The studio's doing great. If you join, we'll make you the brightest designer out there." "Can I really?" "Why not?" The mentor feigned anger. "I know your skills best. If only you hadn't quit back then." Jason took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll come. I'll head over once the divorce is finalized." Just as he finished speaking, Joanna walked in, eyes fixed ominously on Jason. "Where are you going?" Jason quickly ended the call, pretending to be calm. "You heard wrong." Joanna squinted but didn't press further. She casually suggested, "You've been upset with Harry over the design issue. Tomorrow, let's go to the amusement park to clear the air." Jason almost refused but swallowed his words. Refusing too strongly might make her suspicious. "Okay," he nodded softly. At the amusement park, the crowd was loud. Joanna held Harry's hand the whole time, strapped him into the roller coaster, fed him ice cream, and wiped his sweat. Jason followed like an extra shadow. When Joanna stepped aside to take a call, Harry grabbed Jason's hand. "Let's ride the drop tower, Jason." Jason pulled back instinctively. "I'm not going." Joanna said we should get along. Harry leaned in. "Are you still mad about the design thing?" You're so petty. Curious eyes turned their way. Jason pressed his lips together, not wanting to cause a scene, and reluctantly got on the ride. Click. Safety bar locked down. Harry leaned in. You know Joanna's taking me to the Maldives after the divorce. His words cut off as the ride jerked violently. In the moment the safety harness broke, Jason felt weightless. He and Harry fell from a height. The wind roared by, and Jason closed his eyes in despair. But there was no impact. He landed on something soft. Opening his eyes, he met Joanna's panicked gaze. She had pulled over a safety mat in a rush. You, Jason began, but Joanna quickly released him as if burnt. Saved the wrong person, she awkwardly explained, rushing to Harry, who lay on the ground. Harry, in the hospital corridor, doctors rushed out. The patient needs a blood transfusion. Blood type is Rh negative, low supply in the bank. Joanna's eyes locked on Jason. You're Rh negative too. It wasn't a question, just a statement. Jason leaned against the wall, blood still seeping from his knee. He realized Joanna's intention. Donate blood. Joanna stepped closer, whispering, I'll agree to cancel the divorce. Her breath brushed his ear, carrying a familiar scent. Time was, such nearness would quicken his heartbeat. Now he just felt cold. When the nurse brought over the consent form, Jason quickly signed it. He knew if he refused, she'd definitely get suspicious. He couldn't take the risk, nor let her find out about the Paris plan. As the needle slid into his vein, Jason turned away, watching his blood fill the bag. 1 bag, 2 bags. Stop. That's too much. The nurse suddenly gasped. He's reached his limit. Jason's vision blurred, a buzzing in his ears. In a daze, he saw Joanna frowning at his bedside, lips moving but her words unclear. The hospital's white walls stung his eyes. After giving blood, doctors insisted he stay for observation. Joanna never once came to see him. His phone buzzed with Harry's photos. Joanna feeding him porridge. Joanna by his sickbed, stealing a kiss while she slept. Jason deleted one photo after another, feeling nothing inside. Turns out when your heart is truly dead, even pain stops existing. On the last day of their cooling-off period for divorce, Jason woke up early. Sunshine peeked through the curtains as he packed the last piece of clothing into his suitcase. A quiet plane ticket to Paris rested in his bag, with a flight set for 3 p.m. Just then, the doorbell rang. Joanna stood there in a sleek, professional dress that screamed she'd just come from a crucial meeting. Harry is out of danger, she said straight away. I keep my promises. I'll go with you to cancel the application. Jason gazed at her in silence. She added, but if you screw up again, I'm filing for divorce. Jason felt the urge to laugh. There won't be a next time. He was ready to live his own life. They drove on in silence. When they reached the Civil Affairs Bureau, Jason clenched his hands tightly. We're here, Joanna said, undoing her seatbelt. Let's get this done. I have to go see Harry at the hospital. Jason glanced at the all-too-familiar glass doors of the bureau, his fingers nervously touching the edge of his phone. He needed a plan to stop Joanna from going in with him. She couldn't be there. He began, but Joanna's phone rang. She frowned, answered. Harry? What's wrong? Don't worry, I'll come right away. After hanging up, she turned to Jason. Harry's not doing well emotionally. I have to go. You go in and cancel the application, then text me once it's done. Jason lowered his eyes, hiding his relief. Okay. He watched Joanna's car speed away, then turned back and walked into the bureau. Aren't you here to cancel the application again, Jason? The familiar clerk smiled at him. No, he said, pulling out prep documents from his bag. I'm here to finalize the divorce. Back home, Jason placed Joanna's copy of the divorce papers on the coffee table, then grabbed his packed suitcase. The door clicked shut gently, but it felt like a knife slicing away 7 years of misguided dreams. On the way to the airport, the sun shone brilliantly. Jason rolled the window down and closed his eyes, savoring the air filled with freedom. Goodbye, Joanna. This time, I'm truly done with you. Meanwhile, Joanna returned to the hospital, hearing Harry's voice. Was that your girlfriend taking care of you these past few days? Someone asked Harry. No way. Joanna's always been this caring towards me. Harry chuckled, pretending. Joanna heard remarks like these before, knowing his little intentions. But it would never happen. She'd only ever love Jason. Even if they divorced 100 times, they'd remarry. By now, Jason should have happily canceled the divorce application. Imagining his expression brought a smile to her face as she entered the room, saw Harry's uneasy look. Joanna, you really came. What about Jason? If you don't go, won't you end up actually divorcing him? Joanna almost laughed at his clumsy act, seeing right through his ambition to take Jason's place. If he weren't useful to provoke Jason, she wouldn't spare him a glance. I've already canceled it. I'm not divorcing Jason, she stated coolly. Harry's face fell, from surprise to resentment. Then he forced a nod. I see. He must have begged you again, Joanna. You're kind, but too soft-hearted. Joanna chuckled, letting his words slide. With a glance, she knew Harry was nearly recovered. Thinking more of Jason's happy face upon hearing she'd canceled the divorce. He'd always make a feast to celebrate her decision. Such tender, unrestrained love thrilled her over and over again. I'm heading back. You stay. She turned to go. No gentle feeding, no tantalizing closeness. Joanna's detached tone startled Harry. Despite not being fully healed, he hurriedly got out of bed. Joanna! She glanced back, scrutinizing him with inquiring eyes. Harry felt the flush of embarrassment being seen through, yet clung to his belief in her love for him. He composed himself enough to say with a light laugh, I'll go back with you. Let's see how Jason's doing. Such weak excuses again. Joanna hadn't wanted to bring him along. She missed time alone with Jason, his strong arms around her, those pure yet cautious eyes. But she just agreed to canceling the divorce, couldn't let him settle too comfortably yet. She'd find a reason to shoo Harry away later, she decided, as she let him follow. In the underground garage, ignoring Harry trailing behind, Joanna stepped into her car. Harry yanked open the passenger side door. Why such a hurry today? He panted, whining. Get out, Joanna suddenly instructed. What? Harry froze, not understanding at all. Out. Sit in the back, Joanna explained, frowning. Today, she wouldn't let Harry sit where Jason once did. Why? I always sat up here, Harry pleaded helplessly, before Joanna sharply cut him off. Back seat or get out. Feeling the undeniable tone in Joanna's voice, Harry held on for a while, realizing there was no turning back. He got out of the front seat and grudgingly sat in the back. The next second, Joanna hit the gas and sped off. Just thinking about Jason probably waiting for her in the living room made Joanna emotionally charged. She ran through who knows how many red lights, driving recklessly, until she finally reached an intersection near the villa. She stopped, regaining her composure, with only a slight smirk at the corner of her mouth. For the last few hundred meters, Joanna drove slowly, as if reluctant to return. But once they reached the entrance, she was the first to get out. We're here. Get out, she said, instinctively heading for the door, but then remembered something and paused to wait for Harry. The man in the back seat, still dizzy from Joanna's wild driving, took a moment to get out. He expected Joanna to go in first, but he lit up, walked over with a happy face, and took Joanna's hand. Sorry, Joanna. Did I keep you waiting long? Joanna said nothing, leading him inside. She expected to see a sumptuous meal, to see Jason clumsily trying to please her in an apron. She thought she'd see his usual willingness to accommodate her, his humble yet indulgent love. But instead, the room was empty. There was nothing at all. Her smile faded. Your injury's not fully healed. How about you stay here tonight? She asked Harry gently, tilting her head, though her expression hinted at repressed anger. Jason hadn't shown his usual affection, and she just agreed to drop the divorce application today. In less than a day, he'd gone off somewhere. If that's the case, she'd have to keep provoking Jason. Joanna kept her face expressionless but acted sweetly, drawing Harry in. Thank you, Joanna, but staying here won't bother you and Jason, right? I mean, you just called off the divorce. What if you end up applying again because of me? Harry chuckled softly. His words were exactly what Joanna wanted. She snorted lightly, glancing at the second-floor room with purpose. You didn't do anything wrong. If Jason's not happy, he can go stay elsewhere. Harry, following her gaze, quickly realized the room belonged to Jason. His face lit up with excitement, which he soon reined in, tucking a stray bit of hair behind Joanna's ear tenderly. In that case, I'll take that room on the second floor. Okay, Joanna? Joanna chuckled softly, not replying, but her steps towards the stairs showed her approval. She reached the second floor, pushed open the door. Jason, you hear me? Harry's moving into your room. But the room was empty, devoid of anyone or even Jason's belongings. Joanna's expression changed. She suddenly remembered that when Harry last stayed over, Jason had moved out and never came back. Seeing the empty room now made her anxious. Why wasn't Jason home? He should have returned by now. He must have been delayed. Forcing herself to calm down, she addressed Harry. Go ahead and settle in. Jason hasn't brought his things back yet. Harry's face lit up, hastily agreeing. He planned to order all his essentials online to be delivered directly. Considering he might be living there with Joanna for a while, Harry asked Joanna's opinion on every item. They bought matching towels and toothbrushes, even replacing the sheets. Watching movers come and go, gradually erasing Jason's traces, Joanna said nothing but her brows knitted tightly. She kept picking up and putting down her phone. Jason hadn't messaged her today. Given their history, today being the first day of calling off the divorce, Jason should have messaged her a lengthy text by now. But she hadn't received anything. As soon as Jason returned and apologized, she'd send Harry packing, even changing everything in the villa back. She reassured herself with those thoughts. Standing in the villa for hours, until Harry changed everything and the last memory of Jason was wiped out, her carefully maintained indifference shattered. Throwing aside her pride, she called him with a grim expression. She had rehearsed her opening line, but after the phone rang for a full minute, she only got a cold, automated response. For the first time, Jason didn't answer her call. Rage boiled up inside her, and she started typing a message. Not answering my call? We just canceled the application, and now you want a divorce? Before she could send it, she saw a red exclamation mark. It was so rare she had to glance at it several times to confirm Jason had blocked her, not the other way around. Suddenly, realizing something, she tried calling again, but once more, met the same automated response. Jason had blocked her. What was he trying to do? Did she unintentionally show him she loved him, making him think he had the upper hand over her? Otherwise, why would he block her? Joanna's expression turned icy. She still hadn't figured out why when Harry exclaimed, Joanna, you and Jason are divorced? What? Divorced? Didn't we just cancel the application? Joanna's mind went blank for a moment. Then she turned to Harry. The man had a clear smile on his face, holding a small red booklet. In an instant, Joanna felt like something hit her. An impossible idea flashed in her mind. She rushed over and grabbed the booklet from Harry's hand. It was a divorce certificate. Her breath almost stopped, and her fingers trembled as she opened it. There were her and Jason's names. He hadn't gone to cancel the application today. Instead, he agreed to the divorce and smoothly got the certificate. Joanna's mind went blank, a buzz in her ears. Harry couldn't hide his joy. He understood everything now. No wonder Joanna brought him home, wanted him to stay in what was Jason's room, even changed the room's layout. It was all for this surprise. Joanna, so that's it, you didn't agree to cancel the divorce application with Jason this time. Harry's eyes were full of eager anticipation. But Joanna couldn't feel anything. How could Jason leave her? How could he agree to divorce? At that moment, she couldn't hear Harry's voice or the mover's noise. It was a while before she could squeeze out a sentence. Get out. What? Harry didn't hear her clearly. I said get out. She suddenly screamed angrily. Harry was startled. He couldn't understand why the woman who was just kind to him suddenly became so angry. He stood there, confused. Joanna, why are you acting like this suddenly? Did Jason say something? But Joanna had no intention to deal with him any longer. She called in the security guards and had Harry thrown out, including the movers he hired. Once the villa was empty, Joanna's strength faded. She held her head, unable to believe Jason had actually divorced her. He loved her so much, pleaded humbly 99 times. How could he agree to divorce her now? Joanna swept the cups off the coffee table in a sudden motion. She didn't believe it. Jason must be testing her with this move. Her panicked expression gradually calmed down. Joanna called her assistant. Find me all the footage of Jason during this time. I need to know what game he's playing. If I find out, it won't just be about a divorce application next time. She contained her anger as the assistant left. It was evening when the assistant returned with a USB drive, but her face didn't look good. Joanna, we've collected everything, but what? This might not be what you expect. The assistant lowered her head and handed over the USB drive. Joanna looked at it for a few seconds, then plugged it into the computer. She picked a random date and saw footage from the day with Harry's allergy incident at home. She initially just wanted to know what Jason was doing during this time. But as she watched day after day, her brow furrowed tighter. Not only the allergy incident, but the parties and more were all Harry's self-directed acts. Jason had nothing to do with them. If he hadn't done any of these things, what's there to be jealous about? Joanna felt her heart sinking. She had done so many things to hurt Jason under Harry's slander. And Harry, he dared to act so boldly. She silently watched until the end, the footage showing her parting with Jason today. After she left, Jason walked alone into the civil affairs office and got the divorce certificate. After that, where he went was unknown. Quietly finishing the footage, Joanna felt as if all her energy was gone. She suddenly realized Jason had actually explained many times, but she always assumed it was out of jealousy. Thinking back now, he didn't beg like before during this divorce. Jason seemed to have given up from the beginning. What she mistakenly thought were Harry's covert tricks were actually Jason's jealousy. Not only did she not help him, but she aided those who hurt him, pushing away the one she loved most. She slowly slid down against the wall, drained of energy. The video continued to replay, recounting her wrongdoings, filling Joanna with unbearable pain. She jumped up, madly smashing everything Harry brought in. Those couple's items, Harry's preferences, they occupied Jason's room. Joanna threw everything to the ground, venting her discontent. But even until everything in the room was broken, it couldn't return to its original state. Her heart was cold. She gradually stopped her meaningless actions. Yet the panic in her heart only grew, like a tide overwhelming her, making her worry if she really lost Jason. No, impossible, he must be mad at her. She promised not to divorce him again. After this reunion, she wouldn't make things hard for Jason, allowing someone like Harry to exploit the situation again. The more she thought about the footage, the angrier Joanna got. She called her assistant. Go find Jason. No matter where he is, find him. Tell him I want to remarry him. Don't play around like this. And bring Harry to me. I need to ask him some things personally. Okay, Joanna. The assistant left, and soon, Harry knocked on the villa's door. He really couldn't figure out what Joanna was up to today. One moment she was nice, then cold, but surely Jason had upset her. Joanna still needed him. Harry was immensely confident. Hearing an enter, he straightened his shirt and walked in. Joanna, you called for me? He put on a bright and gentle smile, only to see the villa in a mess. All the things he had just bought were now shards, and Joanna stood at the center, her eyes cold and indifferent. Harry, do you think you're already Joanna's husband? Harry froze for a moment when hit with that accusation, then awkwardly laughed it off. Joanna, what are you talking about? You just got divorced from Jason. I ask you, do you think just because I've been a little nice you can go behind my back and pull stunts on Jason? Joanna suddenly raised her voice. She couldn't be bothered to put on a good face for Harry anymore. If it weren't for Jason, she wouldn't even look at a guy like Harry. And yet, this guy had the nerve to mess with Jason in the shadows. What are you talking about, Joanna? What did I do to Jason? Harry's face went pale, but he didn't admit anything. Joanna let out a cold laugh. She knew exactly how he'd react. She led him straight into another room where footage was playing, casting light on Harry's face. He hadn't expected Joanna to have done her homework this thoroughly. His face went even paler, stammering out some excuses. "Joanna, just hear me out. I couldn't stand Jason making you mad and then sucking up to you, so I just wanted to teach him a lesson. That's all." Before he could finish his sentence, Joanna cut him off sharply. "A lesson? I think you just wanted him out of the picture so you could take his place. Who do you think you are, Harry, to mess with Jason?" Without Jason, Harry was nothing but a tool with no use. Those eyes that once held softness were now icy cold, especially after he dared to threaten Jason to divorce her. Thinking of this, Joanna's expression darkened even more, causing a surge of fear to rise in Harry. "Everything you've done to Jason, you're going to pay back." With those words, 2 bodyguards stepped up and grabbed Harry. He didn't see it coming when Joanna's assistant approached him. "Joanna, what are you going to do?" Harry struggled in panic, feeling something was seriously wrong, but Joanna remained silent. In the next moment, the assistant slapped him hard across the face. The sound was loud, twisting his face to the side, his eyes widening in disbelief. But before he could ask any questions, the assistant continued to smack him repeatedly, making blood trickle from the corners of his mouth as he cried out in pain. "Joanna, what are you doing? It hurts, Joanna." The more he shouted, the harder the hits came. Joanna showed no mercy. "You think you have the right to call for Joanna? Without Jason, you're nothing, and you dared to threaten him." Her eyes narrowed, and Harry finally realized Joanna was hitting him for Jason's sake. But why was it for Jason? Harry was beyond shocked. He couldn't wrap his head around it. He took 99 more hits before the bodyguards let him go. By then, his face was swollen red with blood at the corners of his mouth. But what shook him more were Joanna's next words. "This isn't enough. What you've done recently was much worse. Harry, you've got some nerve. Now that Jason's really gone, you're useless to me." Her icy words sank in, and he suddenly understood. But it was too late now. With no time to rest, the bodyguards pinned Harry down, forcing an entire jar of peanut butter into his mouth. Soon, hives covered his body and his breathing grew labored. "Joanna, I'm allergic," he wheezed, his whole body itchy and in pain, but held firmly by the guards, leaving him no way to escape, forced to swallow more peanut butter until he was on the brink, eyes rolling back from the allergic reaction, before Joanna finally allowed her assistant to get some medicine. Harry lay discarded on the floor, every ounce of life sapped away. "That's your punishment for framing Jason and claiming an allergy." Joanna's words echoed like from the depths of hell. "And as for the thugs you hired to bully him, hit him." Harry couldn't even get a word in before he was pummeled with kicks and punches like a downpour, each kick landing on the vulnerable parts of his body from the sturdy bodyguards. Crack, his rib broke, expelling blood as he cried for mercy. "Joanna, I was wrong. I get it now, please spare me." But the woman was unmoved. "This is just the beginning, Harry. You owe far more than this, and until Jason's back, you'll endure all he went through," she said, turning to leave, but the beatings continued, not letting up on the curled-up man on the floor. He didn't know how long it lasted, but when Harry felt like his whole body was falling apart, he blacked out. When he woke, he was in a hospital. Weakly, he opened his eyes to find tubes in his arm. Realizing he was being drained of blood, Harry wanted to scream and struggle, but his limbs were bound to the bed, leaving him helpless, forced to watch as bag after bag filled with his blood. His vision swirled, his entire being on the brink of collapse. "Joanna, if we take more, this man won't make it." The nurse spoke with concern. "Keep going, it's what he owes Jason," Joanna said coldly. Harry feebly lifted his eyes. At that moment, he finally understood Joanna. Her heart had room for only Jason. But if that's the case, what did all those mixed signals, all that tenderness mean? She was the one who neither rejected nor believed in Jason. He cried out in despair but soon lost consciousness again from the blood loss. Only when they could draw no more blood did Joanna allow the doctors to save him. Because it was done in time, Harry ended up being fine in the long run. But once he opened his eyes, he screamed at the sight of Joanna as if he'd seen a demon. "Joanna! Let me go, let me go. I already know I was wrong. I'll apologize to Jason. It's all my fault." Joanna nodded slightly, showing her satisfaction. This was part of her plan from the start. Harry needed to realize his mistakes and stop picking on Jason before Joanna would take him back. But it wasn't quite there yet. Joanna looked at him. "Since you know you were wrong, you need to stay in the confinement room until Jason returns." When Harry heard this, he froze for a moment, then began to struggle like crazy, screaming, "No, don't send me to the confinement room, Joanna, Joanna." His struggles didn't change anything. Joanna found him annoying and threw him into the confinement room, shutting the door tightly, crushing his last bit of hope. In the confinement room, there was no light at all. Eating, drinking, and everything else happened in this tiny cage. A day here could drive anyone crazy. Joanna ignored Harry. She straightened her dress, still feeling a bit upset. "Have you found him?" An assistant stepped forward. "Not yet, sorry, Joanna." With a bang, Joanna smashed a vase nearby. Unconcerned about the blood from her fingers, she spoke calmly. "Keep looking. Don't come back until you find him." Blood dripped from her hand to the floor. The assistant lowered their head even more and quickly left. The staff at home didn't dare speak loudly. They all knew Joanna's temper had gotten worse since Jason left. They feared getting caught in the crossfire. Joanna took a deep breath, ignored the fearful faces of her staff, and drove herself to a bar. She downed strong liquor, sip after sip, to ease her inner pain. Her friends knew she was at the bar and came to sit with her. "Joanna, so Jason left? He was always asking to get back together. Even though you're really divorced this time, he might give in and come back in a couple of days." "Yeah, everyone knows Jason can't live without you." They joked. But only Joanna knew she was the one who couldn't live without Jason. Ever since he pursued her, she couldn't let go of him. Joanna gave a bitter laugh and took a big gulp. When her friends saw that comforting her wasn't working, they exchanged confused looks. "Joanna, you've brought up divorce so many times. Now that it's final, shouldn't you be happy?" Her hand tightened around the bottle, not knowing how to express the dark, twisted pleasure inside. Every time she saw his awkward expressions, she lingered a little longer, deliberately withholding agreement to his advances. They didn't marry until after graduation. Even after marrying, she didn't change her ways. She enjoyed seeing Jason worrying over her. Only then did she feel satisfied. She mentioned divorce 99 times, and each time Jason pleaded her not to. But on the 100th time, she really lost him. The thought stung her heart like a sharp needle, leaving her breathless. Meanwhile, others started to murmur. "And I think Harry's pretty great too. Smart and sensible. If you're truly fed up with Jason, hanging out with Harry wouldn't be so bad." Mentioning Harry made Joanna, who had been calm, suddenly grip the bottle tightly. "Don't mention Harry in front of me." Her cold voice startled everyone. They all knew Harry was her childhood friend, by her side for years without annoying her. Remarkably, Joanna's attitude toward Harry and Jason were like night and day. People used to joke the one Joanna really loved was Harry, and she hadn't denied it. Why was her reaction suddenly so negative? The room quieted down, but someone eventually couldn't help asking, "Joanna, did something happen?" "What happened?" Joanna laughed bitterly. "Jason's gone. I've been looking everywhere for him. Harry's the one who drove him away. Right under my nose, he kept going after Jason, forcing him not to come back to me." Her words shocked everyone. They never thought Harry would be like that. But if Joanna didn't want a divorce, why did she keep asking for one, only to withdraw her demand when Jason begged? Everyone exchanged puzzled looks, pondering this, but Joanna was clearly in no mood for their questions. They could only offer weak comfort. Eventually, Joanna drank all the alcohol and stumbled out onto the street, getting a ride home from her assistant. The mess from the smashed vase was cleaned up, but the room remained empty, void of any presence, especially Jason's. The room had lost its warmth through all their ups and downs, and now it was entirely barren. Joanna entered and sat on the bed, reflecting on many memories. From the first time she got angry and Jason tried to cheer her up, she had become addicted to that feeling. Watching someone she loved go out of their way just to make her smile filled Joanna with vanity. Her demands grew more audacious, seeking to see just how far Jason would go for her, how precious his love could be. Even though she told herself not to go too far, seeing Jason brought out her darker side. She wanted to see him kneel, to see him jealous, to see him risk everything for her. Now that Jason had left this ridiculous game, she realized how absurd her actions had been. If she had another chance, she'd never suggest divorce. Joanna sat by the bed all night. The next day, her assistant approached. "Joanna, it's been 3 days. If you don't let Harry out, he's not gonna make it." Joanna was reminded and then remembered Harry was still locked in the punishment room. Just thinking about him made a wave of disgust flash in her eyes. If it wasn't for him stirring things up, Jason wouldn't have been forced to leave. Joanna got up, her eyes ice cold. "Let's go see him." They went to the confinement room. As soon as the assistant opened the door, a scream rang out. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Don't lock me up. I know I was wrong. I know I was wrong." Harry was curled up in the corner, holding his head. The room was a mess of stink, but he seemed oblivious, muttering nonstop. It took him a while to notice the light in front of him. Harry looked up and saw the open door and Joanna standing outside. He rushed over like he'd found a lifeline, clinging to Joanna's pant leg, crying desperately. "Joanna, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have threatened Jason. Please let me go, I really know I was wrong." He had spent 3 days and nights in the punishment room, which was more terrifying than all the punishments he'd ever received. He sobbed and pleaded, his face wet with tears. Looking at the face that was once so handsome, Joanna felt only disgust. She kicked Harry away. "I told you, until Jason comes back, your punishment won't stop. Since you had the guts to force Jason to divorce me, then today you should know this is your deserved karma." She said it without emotion, making Harry stare at her in disbelief. It seemed like he realized Joanna had no pity for him, and he suddenly broke down. They were childhood friends, he'd known her since they were kids, and he'd liked Joanna longer than anyone. Now why was he going through this because of Jason? Why was Joanna looking at him like that? Harry pulled a bitter smile, tears of sadness in his eyes. "Joanna, do you really think it's all my fault?" The woman looked at him steadily. "Yes, it's all your fault. Without you, Jason wouldn't have left me." Hearing her certainty, Harry couldn't help but laugh. He laughed as tears streamed down, eventually turning to hatred, a harsh stare fixated on her. "It's not my fault, it's yours. Joanna, you know perfectly well, if Jason didn't stop loving you, he wouldn't have left. You're just making excuses. You don't want to admit you're the one who lost Jason. Joanna, you drove Jason away yourself. It was you, not me. If Jason truly loved you, he wouldn't have left, he'd already planned on leaving. Poor you, waiting for him to beg you. You tried too hard, divorced for real, can't find him now, and suddenly panicked. Joanna, you pushed him away." Harry ignored everything else and let out everything inside him. Joanna looked at him with cold disdain, as if he were trash. "Shut up," she spat out. But Harry didn't listen, he only spoke louder. "Still don't want to admit it? Let me tell you, no one can handle divorcing 99 times. Jason was pushed away by you." I said, "Shut up, Harry." "Joanna, Jason was pushed away by you. It was you, it was you." Joanna suddenly lunged forward, grabbing Harry by the throat. Harry, after 3 days, was almost out of strength, barely breathing under Joanna's grip. "Crazy, Joanna, you're crazy. No wonder Jason left you," he struggled to say, feeling the air slowly disappear, close to suffocation. "Joanna." Her assistant spoke just in time, reeling Joanna back to her senses. She let go, and Harry fell to the ground limp. Joanna gave him a long stare, then turned and left, not caring if Harry lived or died. She went back to Jason's room, and looking around, the pressure in her chest increased, wishing to find something to vent her anger on. She couldn't bear to dwell on Harry's words. It couldn't have been her who drove Jason away, not her. Grabbing a coat, she headed straight for a bar. Only alcohol could calm the storm inside her now. Joanna didn't tell anyone, she just sat alone, drinking bottle after bottle until she was nearly drunk. That's when she saw someone passing by on the phone. "Did you really see Jason?" "Don't worry, he's already divorced Joanna." It's hilarious, that guy can't seriously think anyone could put up with her constant drama, right? Making it through 99 almost divorces with her, that's impressive. She couldn't make out the rest, only the mention of Jason. Those words had a magic-like effect, snapping her back to reality. Joanna fixated on the person, staggering over. "What did you say? Do you know where Jason is? Do you know where he is now?" Her sudden appearance startled the person, who quickly put away their phone with a forced smile. "Joanna, what are you talking about? You must have misheard. How could I possibly know where Jason is? Joanna squinted and realized it was her best friend. Who were you talking to? I clearly heard you mention Jason. If you don't spill, you're not leaving here today. Her anger from the past days left her with no patience. Joanna grabbed a bottle and smashed it on the ground, her face filled with menace. It was the first time she'd seen Joanna like this, surprising her. With Joanna's capabilities, she knew she wouldn't escape, so reluctantly she told the truth. Joanna, please don't get upset about what I'm going to say. I think you're in the wrong here. Everyone can see how much Jason loves you, yet you keep treating him poorly. Of course, he'd leave you. I have a friend who saw Jason overseas. She's into him and wants to know if you two are really done. I wasn't planning to let you know, but... After that, Joanna couldn't hear anything else. Jason's abroad. He's really abroad. She's found him. Suddenly, her mind cleared and she grabbed the person's collar, demanding to know where exactly Jason was. He was in Paris. He went to Paris. Hope surged within her. She couldn't wait any longer. She was determined to win Jason back, willing to change her ways, never again questioning his love or hurting him. Joanna immediately booked the quickest flight. She packed nothing and drove straight to the airport. In 10 hours, she'd see Jason. On the flight, Joanna was a bundle of nerves. Through some focused digging, she learned Jason had joined a studio in Paris to continue his design work. That's fine. If he comes back, she could set up a studio just for him. Not just that, her company could even invest whatever makes him happy. If he still wants to design, she could deal with it. As for all those familiar people around Jason, she hated the idea of the one she loved being close to others, but if it made him happy, she could arrange for them to return home. The local opportunities were bound to be better than those abroad. The real question was, would Jason forgive her? For 10 hours, Joanna couldn't shut her eyes. She realized that if Jason didn't forgive her, she'd show him that her love for him is greater than anything. If he'd just reconsider, she'd be the one begging this time. No matter the cost, she'd accept it. With anxiety gnawing at her, Joanna stepped off the plane and found her way to the studio where Jason now worked. All she had to do was open that door and she'd see him. Joanna's heart raced, unsure of what Jason's reaction would be. Was he missing her as much as she missed him, or did he now hold resentment? After a few moments of gathering courage, she knocked. The door swiftly opened, revealing an unfamiliar woman. Hi there, can I help you? Joanna smiled. I'm here to see Jason. Is he around? Oh, you're looking for Jason? He's not here today. He's got a date. If you wanted a design consult, you'll need to come back tomorrow. Her casual tone felt like a punch in the gut to Joanna. It hadn't been long since the divorce, yet Jason was already dating someone else? A confusing mix of emotions grew in Joanna's heart as she recalled her friend's words about someone else pursuing Jason. Her hand balled into a fist, desperately wanting to rush to Jason and declare him as hers alone, divorce or no, insisting they'd remarry, leaving no room for anyone else in between. She stifled the urge to demand the date's location or identity and walked away, fists clenched. She stood outside for a moment, then headed to Jason's place. Though he wasn't home, she'd wait for him. She needed to prove her sincerity to him. The Parisian heat was relentless, with no shade in sight. Joanna stayed there under the scorching sun until night fell without any sign of Jason. Then came the rain, thunder roaring across the sky. It was dangerous to stay outside, but Joanna stood her ground, getting drenched, not budging an inch. Yet a full day and night later, Jason hadn't returned. Joanna was dizzy from exhaustion, having gone days without rest and now soaked through. Somehow, she still kept herself upright until she finally collapsed. When Joanna woke, she was in an unfamiliar place. Dazed for a moment, she suddenly sat up, hoping Jason had been the one to take care of her. Joy washed over her, imagining Jason's concern. She cautiously got out of bed, eager to sneak a peek at him. As she reached the living room, she spotted a familiar silhouette in the kitchen. It was Jason. Her heart warmed, overwhelmed by the relief of seeing him again. She wanted to run to him, holding him tight, spilling all her love so he wouldn't need to worry. But as she took a couple of steps forward, she noticed another person in the kitchen. This person hugged Jason from behind. Oh, stop. I'm trying to make soup here. The soup better not be for your ex-wife, mister. Jason. You're divorced, the woman said. It's for you. You said yesterday you were craving this, right? Well, then I want you to feed it to me. Jason chuckled, scooping some soup, cooling it down, and gently offering it to the woman, who drank it, eyes shining with a tender happiness that pierced Joanna. How could Jason look at someone else with that expression? He used to make soup just for her. Whenever she was sick, Jason would spend hours cooking a small pot, cooling it down, and feeding it to her. He'd smile so warmly when she drank it. Now, why was this privilege hers and not Joanna's? She couldn't believe the scene before her, staring in disbelief before her voice finally cracked through the heavy silence. Jason, she called, interrupting the moment. Jason turned, his soft look absent, replaced by a cold indifference. Now that you're awake, you should leave, Joanna. Next time, if you collapse at my door again, I won't help you out, no matter the reason. Joanna felt a deep ache in her heart from Jason's cold indifference. It was like an invisible hand was squeezing her heart, making it hard to breathe. Just when they were supposed to be celebrating a reunion, Jason wasn't happy at all. He even seemed to despise her. The realization hit Joanna hard, leaving her terrified. How could Jason hate her? How could he be with another woman? Her mind was a mess of emotions bubbling in her chest. She took a few deep breaths to calm herself. We've only been divorced a few months and you already have someone new? She asked, unable to hide her jealousy and bitterness. Jason remained silent. Seeing her there, he couldn't believe Joanna found him, but seeing her stirred no feelings apart from unfamiliarity. Any hope or love had been worn away in the past. He felt nothing, not even in response to her questions. When he first arrived in Paris, he buried himself in work. His mentor was right, the studio had potential, and Jason quickly learned the ropes. That was when Melody appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, as if sent especially for him. Initially, Jason wondered if Joanna had hired her, but Melody assured him she didn't know Joanna. Over several months, Jason's wariness faded. Yesterday was their first date. After a huge storm, Jason couldn't get home and had to crash at Melody's. As she drove him back, they found Joanna collapsed at the door. His initial thought was, she's crazy, but still, he carried Joanna inside. Melody pouted at him playfully, having second thoughts about your ex? Not a chance. Jason couldn't leave someone helpless, even a stranger, outside. But after helping, he wanted Joanna gone. Whatever she asked, he didn't feel inclined to explain. We're divorced. Whether I'm dating, in a new relationship, or remarried, it's none of your business. Joanna, you can't stay here. You're not welcome. Jason opened the door, and Joanna felt more pain. She had imagined countless scenarios, but never one where Jason was so heartless, treating her like a stranger. Her voice quivered with pain. Jason, I know Harry upset you before. I've punished him for it. I know I was wrong. I never stopped loving you, Jason. Can't you come back? I know you love me too, you're just angry now. I can wait. I will prove everything I've said is true. Please, Jason, don't leave me. You loved me so much. Once, her words might have overwhelmed him. In their marriage, he was always the careful one, waiting for even a simple kiss, which she only gave reluctantly. Now she cast aside her pride, but it was too late. Jason said nothing, just pushed her out, shutting the door in her face. Inside, Melody watched his expression and, seeing no change, smiled. The soup's really for me, not some show for your ex? Jason chuckled at the tease. I'm not so childish to use this to provoke anyone. Love is love, and if it's gone, it's gone. The soup is for you. You've helped me a lot. Melody laughed lightly, then I won't hold back, I'll leave nothing behind. She ignored the earlier drama as if Joanna was just a passerby who left after one night. She carefully drank all the soup, not leaving even a bite of the ingredients. Watching her, Jason couldn't help comparing her to Joanna. No matter what he made for Joanna before, she'd barely touch it, leaving him feeling inadequate. But now, seeing Melody appreciate his work, a smile played on his lips. Melody, knowing her place in his life, cleaned up and asked to join Jason at work. He didn't refuse. They rode together, arriving at the studio where colleagues gave knowing looks, but Jason offered no explanation, taking his seat. A senior approached Jason. Someone was here asking about a design, left their contact. Want to follow up? Jason agreed. The studio was picking up and more work was always welcome, even from vague clients. He took the note with the contact information and found a quiet spot to call. The call was picked up after just 2 rings, surprising Jason, but his professionalism kicked in. Hello, this is Jason from the studio. Are you looking to have something designed? Silence followed, stretching awkwardly. Just as Jason thought to speak again, a familiar voice answered, Jason. Annoyance crept in. If there's nothing, I'll hang up. This game isn't funny, Joanna. His tone turned cold. Just as he was about to end the call, Joanna's voice hurriedly responded. I'm not kidding. I have something to design. You know, J Group needs a lot of collaboration designs, and I'd love for you to do it. Jason paused. J Group is involved in most of the domestic products. Annually, they spend over $100 million just on design fees. That's insanely high pay, enough to keep his studio afloat without worries for years. But Jason knows Joanna is doing this on purpose. There must be strings attached. He thought about it, then spoke up. What's the catch? Joanna seemed to relax. She'd never been this nervous before, but now that Jason was willing to listen, there seemed to be a chance to make amends. Come back to the country with me, just for a day. That's all I ask. J Group's headquarters are there, and after securing the deal, you'd have to check out things firsthand, right? Jason agreed. He's not overly sentimental. Since Joanna is offering this opportunity to their studio, it's crucial to seize it. With J Group's label, their studio is bound to soar in the future. He and Joanna hashed out the timing for the trip and the specifics of the collaboration for over half an hour. In the end, Joanna couldn't help but ask him, Jason, are you still mad? I've accepted your dreams and agreed you can continue designing. Jason let out a sarcastic laugh. Joanna, there's nothing you can do now to stop me from what I want. With that, he hung up and shared the good news with the rest of the studio. Only a few were aware of his past ties with J Group, so most were thrilled he secured such a massive gig. J Group, after all. While everyone was celebrating, his mentor approached Jason, a bit worried, and whispered, Jason, would Joanna really be so generous to hand us such a big job? Did you agree to any conditions? Seeing the concern on his mentor's face sparked warmth in Jason's heart. If it wasn't for his mentor and others helping him selflessly, he wouldn't have integrated so quickly. He genuinely felt agreeing to one of Joanna's conditions wasn't a big deal. Jason smiled, nothing too demanding. Just that I go back and handle things personally. No need to worry. Relieved to hear the condition was only about coordinating designs, his mentor relaxed a bit. Ever since he learned about Jason's past experience, he'd feared Joanna might hurt him again. But others couldn't let it go that easily. Later that evening, Jason ran into Melody. She looked anxious and was hesitant. Seeing her like this was odd since Melody was very straightforward. When did she start looking so troubled? It only took Jason a moment to realize what she was worried about. You're really going back? Sure enough, this was the first thing she said. Jason chuckled, yeah? But don't worry, I told Joanna I'll only be there for a day. Once I finish, I'll head back. The studio's where I want to be now. Melody still looked worried. It seemed like she was gathering courage when she suddenly spoke. Jason, I like you. He blinked, puzzled why she'd say this now. Melody had already confessed before, but Jason felt like he just wanted to work at the time. Besides, he wasn't confident he could commit to someone like he did with Joanna. So he had turned her down back then. Now, even though he had feelings for Melody, he still didn't believe it was the right time for romance. He didn't want to jump into someone else's arms right after escaping Joanna. Just as he was about to speak, Melody hurriedly continued. I know you won't agree now, but I just needed you to know how I feel. Maybe it's insecurity, but I'm scared if you go there, you won't come back. So, Jason, I want to go with you. I can wait. That's what it was. Seeing her anxious expression amused him for some reason. All right, come with me. But Joanna might have other things to discuss with me. If anything feels off, I'll contact you immediately. Melody nodded quickly. Her biggest fear was Jason getting hurt. On the day of the flight back, Joanna arranged a private plane. The two sat quietly inside. Joanna wanted to talk, but after being treated coldly by Jason before, she didn't dare speak much, afraid of driving him away. Jason found the irony in the situation. Right before their divorce, their roles were reversed. He tread carefully around Joanna. Now it was her turn. With a self-deprecating smile, he ignored her gaze and closed his eyes for rest. A few hours later, they landed. Joanna had organized everything seamlessly. Right when they stepped into the terminal, a ride was ready. Their plan, spend the day at the company finalizing details. Jason, representing the studio, would discuss the specifics with the design team. Lunch would be nearby the company. As for the evening, Joanna hadn't said, but Jason could guess it was her real intention. He didn't mind and went along with coordinating at the design department. The head was quite enthusiastic and appreciated Jason's views. They talked for hours, wrapping up the design plans by early evening. Joanna waited nearby with patience. Once Jason was done, she suggested they head to the restaurant. It's important to eat regularly or it'll be hard on your stomach. The department head suddenly remembered something. Is Jason Joanna's husband? Just as Joanna was about to affirm, Jason smiled and corrected. Ex-husband. Joanna and I are already divorced. The minister looked a bit awkward for a moment, and Joanna's face clouded over too, but she held it in and guided Jason to the restaurant they had booked. This place was notoriously hard to reserve. It took at least a month to score a table. God knows what strings Joanna pulled. But Jason didn't care. He sat down and focused on his food, paying no mind to the beautiful scenery outside. Joanna seemed to remember something from the past, a slight smile tugging at her lips. Jason, do you remember? You said you wanted to eat at this restaurant. You mentioned how much you loved the view when we came by. I made sure to reserve the best table where you could see all of Northjing. Jason didn't even look up. Yeah, and you took one bite, called me childish, and wanted a divorce. I remember, Joanna. The atmosphere turned icy. Joanna stayed silent for a while. Jason, I know you hate me now. I promise I'll never bring up divorce again. I won't let anyone bully you. Jason, can you trust me again, just this once? Outside, the stars dotted the sky, the moon hanging high, a rare sight indeed. But it didn't matter to Jason anymore. He wouldn't set himself up for disappointment again. He finished his last bite, wiped his mouth, and stood. If that's all you have to say, I'm leaving. Seeing his cold demeanor, Joanna went pale and grabbed Jason's wrist. I got it. Let me show you something. After you see, you can decide whether to leave. Jason nodded. He got into Joanna's car. She drove fast like she was in a hurry, running several red lights all the way back to their old villa. Opening the door, she led him to the second floor and opened the door to his old room. Everything was the same as before their divorce. Jason looked around carefully, saying nothing. Joanna pulled open the deepest drawer, taking out a familiar brown envelope. She opened it full of love letters. She picked one at random and began reading it aloud. They were feelings she had kept hidden for so long. Jason never told her he had already read them. He listened without emotion as Joanna read years' worth of love letters. His eyes grew red, fingers trembling slightly. Jason, do you believe me now? I truly love you. I made mistakes before, but can you give me another chance? Jason looked at her and suddenly asked, if I said you'd have to kneel here for a day and night for me to forgive you, would you do it? Without a word, Joanna dropped to her knees. With a loud thud, her knees hit the ground and she looked at Jason with hope. Jason just smiled wryly and turned to leave. But I'm not the type to find satisfaction in hurting others. Joanna, when I say I don't love you anymore, I mean it. He walked away, breaking the sliver of hope Joanna had. Jason. Disregarding her composure, she quickly stood and grabbed his wrist. Don't leave, there's one more thing, one last thing to see, she pleaded, tears in her voice. No one would believe this was Joanna talking. Jason said nothing but stayed, following Joanna. They went to the third floor. No one lived there, just a locked room. Jason watched, confused, but Joanna moved with purpose, directing her assistant, open the door and let him out. Soon, Jason understood what Joanna meant. Locked inside was Harry. He appeared mentally unstable, dragged out by security. As soon as daylight hit, Harry screamed, covering his face. Seeing Jason, he crawled frantically to him, breaking down in tears. Jason, it's you. I messed up before, I'm sorry, Joanna never loved me, she's always loved you. I was wrong, I shouldn't have slandered you, it's all my fault. He said this while bowing repeatedly, disregarding his dignity. The once polished Harry was now a wreck. Whatever methods Joanna used to bring Harry to the state, it wasn't hard to guess. Jason felt no satisfaction from revenge, only fear. But Joanna was pleased. She'd kept Harry there for the stay to make him admit his wrongs to Jason. She smiled. Are you happy now, Jason? Jason looked from her to the trembling Harry. Let Harry go. Hearing this, Joanna's face turned blank with confusion. She didn't understand why Jason was unhappy. Harry had wronged him so much. Didn't he want revenge? Didn't he want to see Harry's downfall? She'd put so much thought into this, thinking it would win Jason back. Yet he seemed unaffected, like it had nothing to do with him anymore. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to do, how to win Jason back. In her panic, she grasped Jason's hand. Why? Don't you want revenge? I've punished him for you, Jason, just look at me, please. She was on the verge of tears. It felt like even though she had found him, Joanna couldn't hold onto Jason. It felt like he was miles away. She didn't understand why. But Jason just laughed quietly, eyes full of pity. In your heart, was Harry the only one who hurt me? Joanna opened her mouth but didn't get a word out before Jason spoke coldly. No, Joanna, it's always been you hurting me. His face turned pale. She wanted to explain, but Jason continued slowly. You asked for a divorce so many times just to get me to beg you. Before, I gave up all my pride, even risking my life to keep you from leaving. I gave everything, and you just enjoyed it. Joanna, you've always been the one hurting me. It wasn't until I realized you were using this as a love language that I decided to go. She was speechless, her eyes welling up with tears. Jason walked away again, right in front of her, and she couldn't find any reason to make him stay. Only then did she understand. The moment she decided to use divorce as a test, it was over between her and Jason. Tears streamed down as she passed him by. Jason, you once said we'd be together forever, never apart. Jason didn't look back or halt. His voice drifted softly on the breeze. You were the one who left first. Jason headed to the airport, planning to fly back to Paris. But this time he wasn't alone. Melody was waiting for him. Seeing him approaching, Melody visibly relaxed. "You're here? All cleared up?" Jason nodded. He said and did everything necessary. If Joanna still didn't get it, he wouldn't mind saying it 1,000, even 10,000 times. He waited a bit at the airport, then boarded the plane. Melody had booked tickets and luckily their seats were together. As he left the city again, Jason felt conflicted. He didn't hate the city, just the memories of certain people. He sighed deeply, thankful it was finally and utterly over. He reached out and pulled Melody into his arms. Feeling her stiffness, he chuckled. "Let me hold you for a bit." Feeling kinda tired, Melody relaxed to make it more comfortable for Jason. "It must have been hard letting go of the past." He responded softly, "But I've got a better future now." "Yep, your future is bright." Melody chuckled softly and Jason smiled. Eventually, he fell asleep and upon returning to Paris, he went straight to the studio. Life seemed unchanged, moving steadily forward, except Melody clung to him more, always pestering for a title. When the studio reached $1 million in profits, they threw a celebration. It wasn't just for success but also for Jason breaking free from the past. That day, he had a bit to drink and felt teary-eyed looking at his co-workers' faces. Yes, he was finally past it all. He raised his glass in one gulp. Later, Melody drove him home. "You drive me home every day, yet you don't give me a title. Are you planning to string me along forever?" She grumbled. Jason couldn't help but laugh, softly replying, "All right, I'll give you a title." Suddenly, she froze. "You better mean it, Jason. If you blame it on the drinks later, I'll call you a no-good liar." His grin widened as he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her in for a kiss. "I'm committed. Let's be together, I'm ready." Melody trembled slightly. She had waited for this moment a long time. She had never told Jason before, but she noticed him way back when he and Joanna weren't yet married. The timing was just off and she went abroad to start a business after he got married. Fate brought them back together abroad and he was divorced, giving her another chance. Jason often joked about her intentions, but she feared missing a fleeting opportunity. Now she could finally be at ease. Kissing him, Melody playfully scolded. "Kept me waiting so long, but at least you're committing." Jason chuckled. "Yeah, waited so long, but I'm glad I waited for you."